I will be introducing it within the next 2 weeks. Within the private sector, we need to remember that we live in an age in which we have a communications revolution. Now, I know this is hard for 45-year-olds like me. It's a little easier for my kids. But I remember growing up in the industrial era when we had what was called vertical corporations, a vertical business model, heavily centralized, heavily bureaucratized, and it could dictate to consumers what products they could buy and what the price would be. I want you, as painful as this is for me to say, to think about the big three in the 60s and 70s. And what happened with government? In the industrial era, government became a mirror image. It became vertical, centralized, bureaucratic. Well, what we've seen today is a democratization of the economy through the communication revolution, because you live in what? A horizontal consumer economy where the power is in your hands to extents undreamt before, to make your own decisions, receive your own information, and in short, through the collective genius of individuals to set the course of the free market. And what do we see out of Washington? We continue to see the antiquated model of big government, which is imploding, trying to be propped up by the regressive Democratic Party because it is their power base and they don't know any better. You cannot put an antiquated vertical government on top of a consumer-driven economy and expect to have prosperity, because it will be impossible to lift an economy up from beneath the crushing ruins of the welfare state that they are trying to sustain. In short, what you have to do is you have to taxation, regulation, litigation, relief, and reductions. And more importantly, in my mind, what you have to do is the glue that will hold it all together is true bank reform of the Wall Street banks, so we can get credit flowing back into this economy. We can utilize the entrepreneurial genius of the American people and help small business and startups and innovators grow this economy. And that will happen. In the area of national security, I have a very simple message. I know it is very tempting to turn away from the struggle in which we find ourselves, an unsought struggle, as I point out. But as we learn from the disasters of the 20th century and of the disasters that we're trying to prevent in the 21st, in the age of globalization, isolation is not an option. We were attacked on September 11th. We remain threatened by the terrorist enemy who will kill themselves and their children to kill you and yours. There is no accommodation with Al-Qaeda. There is no accommodation with terrorists who are essentially a death cult bent upon subjugating you. We will show that our love of liberty and our cherishing of life will trump their love of death. We must continue to view our national security not as an opportunity for a speech and spending and hoping for the best, but as an integrated whole. And in the Middle East, in the fight against terrorism, the first thing we must always do is stand shoulder to shoulder with our dear democratic ally, Israel. As the basis not only of security, but of peace. We must continue in Iraq to support our brave men and women as we do in Afghanistan, because though it is very difficult upon the civilian population here at home to put up with a long struggle, the counterinsurgency plans that are in place are starting to work in Iraq and have to be given a chance to work in Afghanistan, because what we must do to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran is twofold. We must take the Reagan doctrine of containing and rolling back the Soviet Union so there was a peaceful implosion beneath its own people's aspiration of liberty. We must support democratic movements within the Middle East that are pro-freedom, pro-free markets, anti-oppression, so that we can surround the Iranian regime with other nations that are already breathing free. And in conjunction with that, the United States must support the Green Revolution in Iran the same way Ronald Reagan and another generation of Americans supported Solidarity in Poland or Václav Havel in Czechoslovakia. Because that is the ultimate way to prevent any confrontation with Iran, is to allow that tyrannical regime to implode beneath its own people's aspirations for freedom. This is a lesson learned from Lincoln. This is a lesson learned from Reagan. To defend our own liberty, let us expand it abroad, because it will protect ourselves. Now, this is no neoconservative call, but there are things that we can do diplomatically. There are things that we can do economically. There are things that we can do morally to help continue to spread the spark of freedom that commenced in this nation in 1776 and has inspired the world and will continue to. We must continue, because it is not only the Middle East that threatens us. We still have the butcherous, barbarous Castro regime in Cuba. We are seeing a re-Stalinization of Russia under Mr. Putin. And of course, we continue to see Chavez in Venezuela take a democracy down the path of totalitarianism and anti-Americanism. But above all, we cannot be blind to the reality that across the Pacific Ocean, the United States faces a strategic threat and rival model of governance in communist China. And for those who think that my calling communist China is provocative, I remind you that there are 74.3 million of them walking around with cards in their back pocket as party members that say that they are communist. Now, if you have issue with me, I suggest you take it up with them and disabuse them of the notion. I would be more than happy if you could convince them otherwise. And this is a rival model of governance. It is one, the test between ourselves and the PRC, the People's Republic of China, is one that the world is watching. There is a very stark difference between ourselves and them. They believe their people's liberty is a threat to stability and prosperity. We believe liberty is the foundation of security and prosperity, and that only a free people can achieve those two goals. This is why we must end the unconditional appeasement of communist China, a regime that still practices and puts forward a policy that tells its own citizens how many children they can have, a regime that believes they can have a state administration of religious affairs to tell Catholics which church they can go to, that tells Protestants they can't pass out Bibles, that puts people in prison for the free exercise of religion, which was a self-evident truth we've learned over 200 years. A regime that engages in cyber spying against the United States, against our military, against our industrial targets. This is a regime that is building up its military capacities for a deep-water navy. This is a regime that continues to hold Tibet captive, that continues to support the Burma regime that will not allow its people to be free. This is, in short, a regime that, by its own admission, not mine, considers us their #1 rival and is doing everything they can, including currency manipulation and trade practice violations, to weaken us so that their model of governance will be the one that future governments elsewhere follow. We will not let them. We cannot let that happen. We need a constructive containment policy, one that addresses these issues, that reattaches the primacy of human dignity and the freedom of religion to our engagement with communist China. We must also have a clear and convincing cyber defense network put up here in the United States so that we don't see on TV anymore how the CIA has been hacked by people who may be in China, so that we don't see the U.S. Senate has been hacked because of people in communist China, so that we can continue to assess strategically the threat that their military buildup brings, so that we can continue to support the Jasmine Revolution and internet freedom so that the Chinese people can have the liberty that they deserve and we can live in prosperity and security with them one day, rather than having to deal with that regime as a rival model of governance. And we will do this because I know that people out there are saying that the Chinese is the 21st century, the People's Republic of Communist China is the 21st century. I refute that the same way Americans refuted